A lot of people in this room and outside this room particularly, that Amnesty, which has traditionally dealt with repressive governments and civil rights, should be moving into an area that more traditionally, I guess, is the realm of people like the World Bank, United Nations, or the G8. How do you respond to the idea that you might be perhaps broadening your brief too widely and not focusing enough on your traditional strengths?
Well, I would say that issues that I just mentioned of deprivation, of discrimination, of insecurity, of voicelessness, of being denied the right to participate, these are human rights problems. These are denials of civil and political rights, of economic, social and cultural rights. This is about freedom from want, but also freedom from fear. And, you know, freedom from want depends on freedom from fear, and freedom from fear depends on freedom from want. So you need to take a holistic approach to human rights. What I would say to people today about Amnesty is that Amnesty has always stood with the forgotten prisoner. Amnesty stood with prisoners of conscience at a time when governments were in denial about basic rights to free speech and political rights. Today, Amnesty is again standing with the forgotten prisoner. But today's forgotten prisoner is not behind prison bars. Today's forgotten prisoner is trapped in poverty, trapped in gender violence, and we have to throw light on those hidden situations. To me, utopia was like a prison. The people are trapped in poverty there, and you don't free them in the way that you free prisoners of conscience. Because it's not a question of adopting prisoners, it's a question of empowering today's prisoners of poverty. And empowerment, the process of empowerment, is a human rights process. Human rights framework provides you with the values, the tools, the standards by which people can claim their rights and demand it from those who rule in their name. And it's that empowerment process that time and time again, and in my book, in every chapter, I have a good news story. I show how the empowerment process, how recognizing issues of health and housing as rights, how allowing people to participate in designing the solutions to poverty, produce the results. The poor have equal rights, but the reality is that the rich benefit more from those rights than the poor do. And one of the points I make in my book is that the law doesn't work for the poor. The rights are there in law, but the law very rarely serves to protect the poor. The legal system can be bureaucratic, it can be complicated, too complicated for poor people to work out all the different forms and the bureaucracies. Even you mentioned earlier registration of birth or registration of land. All that is impossible for them to do. And then when you do manage to get to courts, it's expensive, poor can't afford it. The judicial elite is very removed from poor people. And so often the police, the state system actually works against the poor. The state tends to criminalize poverty. It tends to criminalize poor people. Think of all the vagrancy laws that are created. The laws against homeless people sleeping on the streets. You get fined for it. And yesterday we were listening to, in Utopia, about how the law is trying to kind of criminalize or make it difficult for people who want to live on their homelands. The law is working against them and against their cultural rights to be on their ancestral lands. So that's a real sense of injustice that's been created there, and that builds cynicism in poor people in human rights. I think that's very, very dangerous. They're very cynical about it.
And it probably builds denial, I suspect, in the rich too.
Yes, because the rich, either they're opting out of a system and they can afford because they have the resources, or they actually use the resources. I mean, when you look at state-run health systems or state-run education systems, it's the middle classes that get most of the benefit of those systems. So the rich don't need to be protected. I think they can look after their own interests. It's the poor, it's the vulnerable elements of society that need greater protection, and that's where the state has to step in. The state has to have some level of regulation of resources so that some people are not pushed out. It's constantly, as human rights activists, we have to ask who's being left behind, who's being pushed out, because human rights are universal.
When you went to Utopia over the weekend in the Northern Territory and you saw great deprivation there, What did you sense from the people you spoke to? What did they think about the idea of human rights? Did they express any views that align with the things you're saying here tonight, or did they just simply say, we need more money?
Well, you know what was interesting was before I went to Utopia, of course, I got a briefing from Amnesty and my colleagues here, and we talked a lot about income management and special measures and so on. But when I went there, what people talked about was their identity, how they were being forced to lose their identity, how they were being torn, pulled away from their homelands, lands of their ancestors, which they believed that it was their cultural right, an obligation, in fact, to take care of that land for past generations and future generations, and they were being forced away from all that. So what they were talking about was their sense of dignity as people. Yes, there was concern about basic cards and so on, but that was almost peripheral, that was almost a consequence of the measures that have been taken. What they were really concerned about is how they were losing their sense of dignity. They were being considered as though they had no value. They were not valued. They were all, you know, and the issue of voice kept coming up again and again and again.
The whole matter of communicating this, you know, I think many people in the advanced countries, Western countries, you know, have goodwill towards the whole concept of handling the poverty argument and trying to find solutions. And a lot of those people are economists, and a lot of people are people just like people in this room, ourselves. But we've been given these mantras. We believe that if we improve the education system, the health system, we have better crops, better fertilizers, you know, all this will lift the society up, and it clearly isn't working. And it just...
leaders, sometimes through its own editorial policies, media has been known to promote popular fears. Media has been known to promote popular prejudices. Fears about hordes of asylum seekers invading your country, or prejudices about how the poor are responsible for their own problems, rather than taking a more, I would say, a careful and critical analysis of what is actually happening. What are the forces at play here? What are the real issues? And how do you promote a secure, stable society that works for everyone?
Well, that sounds like a good point on which to end our conversation, but it's a good point too to open up the conversation with the audience. So I'm not sure if we have mic.